I think we can go ahead and get started. We have a few folks that already joined.
Right. So, good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining the webinar. We're very excited to have this webinar today. My name is Josh Lee, Deputy Director of Planning here at SBCTA. Um, our consulting team and the whole LRMTP team has been at work, and we're excited to kind of share some of the background, some of the findings of analysis that we were engaged in. We're excited to share some of those notes with you today. And so, as usual, our goal for the whole LRMTP and the development of this plan is to allow us to have a comprehensive plan for the county that kind of addresses all the needs of different modes, whether it's transit, whether it's active transportation, or goods movement, for that matter. We want to make sure that all of the modes are addressed, and at the same time also address some of the co-benefits of having a good comprehensive plan related to public health, equity, and environment. So with that, we're very excited to kind of share all the information today. And the most important part of this workshop, of course, is to hear from you all and kind of get your feedback on everything that we've been doing at SBCTA here. So I'm going to hand it over to the consulting team to kind of go over the background and all the information that's going to be shared today.
Thank you, Josh. Hello, everybody. I'm Nancy Verduzco. I'm part of the outreach team. And before we get started, I would just like to give a couple of instructions regarding interpretation. We do have Spanish interpretation available for tonight. So if you do need it, we encourage you to use it. And in addition to that, we ask that everybody chooses a language, English or Spanish. You'll see that available at the bottom of your screen. So if you select the interpretation globe, select English or Spanish. If you need interpretation, selecting English will allow you to hear the consecutive interpretation if we do have any Spanish speakers that provide verbal comments or questions. Hola, bienvenidos. Gracias por acompañarnos hoy. Si necesitan interpretación al español, por favor hagan clic en el icono de interpretación y seleccionen español. Para escuchar solo el idioma interpretado, haga clic en Mute Original Audio para silenciar el audio inglés. And now I will go over some of the meeting format reminders here. This meeting is being recorded and webcams or microphones will remain off during the presentation with exception of our presenters. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. During this time, you may raise your hand by clicking on the raise hand function that's available at the bottom of your Zoom controls or by dialing *9 if you're listening via phone. During the presentation, feel free to add any written comments or questions throughout the presentation by using the Q&A function, and you can also find that at the bottom of your screen. I'll hand it over to Marie to go over the agenda.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So this is what I'm planning to cover in the next half hour or so. I'll move through this as expeditiously as possible so we can have plenty of time for the Q&A. But first of all, I'm going to go over just a little bit of background on the plan itself. What we've been doing on the community engagement side. I'll talk through the vision, goals, and objectives. Talk about some of the scenario planning we've been doing. And finally, kind of the meat of the discussion today is the plan themes and strategic priorities. And then we'll kind of wrap that up with next steps and some question and answer period. So I'll dive right in. So some background on the long-range multimodal transportation plan. The intent of this plan is for SBCTA to ensure the safe and efficient management, operation, and development of a regional multimodal transportation system that, when linked with appropriate land use planning, will efficiently serve the mobility needs of San Bernardino County residents, businesses, and visitors with connectivity to the regional system beyond. So that's kind of the intent of the plan in the nutshell, to give us this multimodal plan that talks about how all these different elements are coming together. So one of the other key aspects of this is that it's not just a regional plan, it's also within the context of other larger regional and statewide plans, like the statewide California Transportation Plan, California Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure, and SCAG regional planning efforts as well. So those kind of provide an overall framework and goals with this, which this plan kind of sits within. We're also going to be, we're bringing all together a lot of different planning efforts that have gone on in the county over the past several years. We're kind of bringing them together under one umbrella and helping to identify funding opportunities for projects through this plan. So the process follows basically 6 key steps. Throughout the past year and a half, we've gone through existing conditions analysis. We've looked at different issues and opportunities that exist throughout the system. We've done some scenario planning, looking at different potential futures and their effects on the system. And right now, we're in the process of developing plan recommendations and bringing it together into the overall draft and final plan. So that's where we need your critical input, and we have had ongoing community engagement throughout the process. On the next slide, the LRMTP includes these 6 subregions of the county. This county being exceptionally large, and there's a lot of differences between the different parts of the county. So these 6 subregions include the San Bernardino Valley, the Mountain Region, the Victor Valley, the North Desert area, which includes Barstow, the Morongo Basin, and the Colorado River. So these subregions are consistent with how SBCTA allocates funding through Measure I. And the analysis and recommendations in the plan will follow this format. So that kind of brings us to our first poll of the evening. A little bit of interaction just to get everyone started. If we want to bring up this polling question, just pretty simple. Which subregion do you live, work in, or most frequently visit? So let us know. You can see the map there on the screen. I'll give folks a little bit of chance to weigh in here. All right, looks like answers are coming in a little more slowly. If anyone wants to put their final answer in here. All right, we can probably close it out at this point. All right, so it looks like by and large, folks here live or work in the San Bernardino Valley subregion, which is not surprising considering that's by far the most populated area of the county. So thanks for weighing in on that, and also glad to see a few people from the mountain subregion join us today. Looking forward to sharing this information with all of you. All right, let's move on. Okay, so the community engagement process. This project has gone on now, as I mentioned, for about a year and a half. We have a project website that's kind of tracked our progress as we've gone on, gosbcta.com/LRMTP. So that's where we post our information on meetings and project progress. We have an overall story map kind of going through different conditions in the county, different parts of the system, and some key information. So feel free to check that out as well. We had a survey that was available about a year ago in the last fall that got people's opinions on their travel preferences, how they experience traveling around San Bernardino County. So we had that open for a few months last year, and we got a lot of good input from that we can share a little bit of that, those results with you tonight. We also have another online survey that is open now. We'll be sharing the link with you, but also when we talk about next steps, I'll go into a little more detail about this survey. This is a survey that talks a little bit more about some of the specific projects that are coming up in the county over the next 10 years or so to get some more input on those projects. So looking forward to everybody taking that survey as well. Could we go back just one? Sorry. Yeah, we had a couple of virtual open houses last year as well. If you guys joined us then, welcome back. We have had some pop-up meetings throughout the county, a couple recently, and we also have a stakeholder working group that's been helping us throughout this process. So we've had several working group meetings to date as well. So the public engagement has continued throughout. So let's go on and talk a little bit more about the survey. So the online survey that we conducted last year between August and October 2023, about over 600 people responded to the survey, which is a great turnout. And as you can see, we have the numbers of how people responded throughout the region. The majority of respondents are from the Valley, but we also had, kind of the distribution of responses definitely kind of mirrored the population distribution in the county overall. So some of the key findings from the survey on the next slide. We asked some folks what modes they use on a regular basis. And as you can see on the right, we have those distributions of what modes folks used. So the majority of respondents drove for most of their trips. So about 66% of folks drove alone in their cars. However, we did have a decent amount of folks using other modes as well, or that didn't have a commute because that's not part of their regular travel. And on the next slide, we asked folks what were some of their biggest mobility challenges. What problems do they have getting around? And by and large, the most common mobility challenge was delay. My trip takes too long because of traffic congestion or other delays. A high percentage of folks ranked that as their top mobility challenge. That was kind of definitely a clear message coming out of this. And what was interesting is that was for both car travelers, but also transit travelers, was that they face delays in their trip. So feeling unsafe was the least common response, and all the other ones, including cost or long distances or accessibility, pretty much about the same. And we also asked folks about their priorities. What is the most important for the transportation system to do? And the highest percentage of the top ranked answers were to make it more convenient for people to get around without driving. Most people chose that as the number one response, followed by providing better transportation options for low-income populations, students, the elderly, and people with disabilities. Third was helping to improve the health and safety of our communities. Fourth was supporting the economy by getting people to jobs and moving goods. And fifth, most important, was protecting the environment and reducing the effects of climate change. So that kind of gives a little snapshot of how people were responding to the different issues facing the county's transportation system. All right, so when we did the initial round of outreach last year, we collected a lot of great information, and we distilled it down into an overall vision for this plan, as well as a series of goals and objectives. So the vision statement for the LRMTP is SBCTA's long-range plan supports integrated multimodal transportation to strengthen the health of our communities, the environment, and our economy by providing safe, reliable, and equitable connectivity for people and goods into and through San Bernardino County. So this is kind of the underpinning statement that goes throughout and focuses our efforts on the LRMTP. We also developed a series of goals and objectives that form the basis for some of our recommendations. I'm not going to go through all of these, particularly the objectives, but in terms of the goal categories, we have 6 main categories of goals. Connectivity, improving multimodal mobility and safe access to key origins and destinations for all users. We have goals for equity and reducing transportation burdens for low-income communities, communities of color, people with disabilities, and other disadvantaged groups. We have supporting a vibrant, resilient economy, enhancing environmental health and reducing negative transportation impacts, improving quality of life and public health by enabling vibrant, healthy communities, And finally, providing a safe and secure transportation system. So having those goals and their associated objectives helps us to focus our efforts and understand, at the end of the day, what are we trying to accomplish with this plan? And that brings me to our scenario planning efforts. So part of this plan included an acknowledgement that times are changing these days for the transportation system in general. There's a lot of unknowns. Things are changing in terms of the way people use transportation, such as coming out of COVID, a lot more virtual interaction, more working from home. There's changes in terms of climate change and how that affects the system. There's changes in the costs. There's changes in the way people power their vehicles, with electric vehicles becoming more prevalent. There's changes in how things are funded. So what we wanted to understand through this planning process is, how can we plan for the unknown? How can we look at the potential effects of different futures and try to understand what some of the outcomes would be if some of those future eventualities came to pass. So we used San Bernardino County, their travel demand model to assess the effects of potential future trends and how they affect the transportation system. So these scenarios considered both the demand, how people use the system, and how many trips they take, things like that, as well as the transportation system itself, the supply. So we wanted to look at it from both angles, because they both really affect how the system performs. So I'll go through the scenarios that we decided to model. The first include the demand scenario. So this has to do with, even if the network stays the same, what are some changes in how people might use the system? So our first scenario we called business as usual, where we basically assumed that travel patterns return to how they were pre-COVID, less working from home, more sort of interactions as they were in 2019. The second scenario was kind of the bookend of that, more of a virtual future scenario, where maybe in the future there's a shift, there's even a greater shift to remote work. And we have less of that commuting type travel on the roadways. What happens then? And the third demand scenario is, what happens if we change the way the land use is developed? What happens if we take the growth in population and employment that's projected to occur, particularly in the Valley subregion, and concentrate it, for example, near major transit corridors, so we understand what those effects could be when we change the land use. So those are our demand-based scenarios, and then we also have some transportation network scenarios on the next slide. So we also looked at an enhanced network. So we looked at what would happen if additional planned projects were able to be built, expanded transit service, more highway improvements. So this would assume that some additional funding is available for those kinds of improvements, and that we see a real kind of enhanced network across the board. The second transportation scenario is transit expansion. We had a lot of questions come up along the way. What happens if we really invest in our transit network, especially transit frequency, make transit more convenient to use? So for this scenario, we doubled bus frequency across the overall Southern California region, and we also assumed that land use would change, similar to the smart growth scenario discussed before. So we can see what happens in that kind of a future. We also conducted a sensitivity test to understand the potential impact of roadway pricing, as the gas tax has lost its purchasing power, and there's overall discussions at different levels about different ways to pay for transportation improvements in future. We just wanted to see what potential outcomes there would be if the cost of driving was higher. And so when we looked at the outcomes of these scenarios, these aren't necessarily alternatives. These aren't different scenarios we're thinking about implementing. These are sort of tests to understand, if different things happened on the network, what would the outcome be? And that helps us to make some responsible decisions moving forward. So what are the outcomes? That's what everybody wants to know. What happens if these different scenarios would theoretically come to pass? So we compared everything to the baseline, the business as usual scenario, where we had basically 2019 travel patterns on the transportation network that's reasonably expected to be implemented. The virtual future scenario, where we had a lot more working from home, we see a kind of a not too much of a change in overall, ways people use the transportation network, but we do see quite a difference in terms of delay and a big decrease in transit ridership. The start growth scenario, we don't see a lot of change across the board, but in the enhanced network, we do see where we significantly increase the transportation system overall, we see a lot of decrease in delay, but we don't see a big change in the amount of overall miles that people drive, basically. Finally, the transit expansion scenario, we do see a decent change in how people use the system in terms of how much they drive, a big decrease in delay, and a very large increase in transit ridership. So this just kind of helps us understand how these um, different potential futures could affect the transportation system and how the system would respond. All right, so some of our key findings, what we've found through this process is that it's easier to reduce delay across the transportation system, but it's much harder to reduce total vehicle miles traveled. So if the capacity is there on the system, people will tend to use it. But there are multiple ways to hopefully improve those delay metrics. When we looked at the roadway pricing sensitivity test, it found that there was definitely a kind of a correlation between the increase in auto operating costs and how much what the change was in terms of overall vehicle miles traveled. However, cost would have to be, quite burdensome in order to, have much change on the network. So it's kind of interesting to see basically what that correlation is. So one of the key findings is when we did look at, increasing transit service substantially, we did see a lot of positive outcomes in terms of delay and ridership across the board. But it would take a massive increase in transit operating funding in order to actually realize those kinds of gains. All right. So let's get to it. Plan themes and strategic priorities. So this is the part where we look at, what are the main challenges facing the county's transportation system? All this work we've done, all the things we've analyzed, all the scenario planning, we try to distill it down into what are the key challenges. And then we can talk about ways to hopefully address those challenges. So we kind of came down with 5 key challenges. The first being multimodal connectivity is challenging in a county like San Bernardino with the dispersed development, long travel distances. It often leads to congestion and dependency on automobile travel. So that's one big challenge. Overall freight movement, it's a backbone of the local economy, but there's a lot of freight traffic, a lot of truck traffic in the region. That contributes to air quality issues, congestion, pavement issues, and safety concerns. Also climate risks. We've seen lately heat, wildfires, floods can disrupt the transportation network, definitely causing issues, especially in areas that don't have many alternatives. And long distances and heat pose challenges for current zero emissions technology as well. Our fourth challenge, equity-focused communities in the region face disproportionate environmental burdens, affordability challenges, and limited connectivity for non-automobile travel. And finally, funding is an ongoing challenge. It's critical to improving the transportation network and delivering needed improvements, but The need outstrips the available sources, and it's particularly a challenge for ongoing transit operations. So those are our 5 key challenges. So how are we going to solve them? That is the question. So this is where we really need your input afterwards. Are we on the right track? Do we have the right strategies identified? So these, as a multimodal long-range plan, these are kind of broad brush, not as many specific recommendations, but, are we prioritizing the right things as we go forward? So what are our priorities for the challenges of multimodal connectivity? First off, we want to invest in a strong and interconnected transit network, developing a core network of enhanced frequent transit services in the areas that they make sense. So not just a different collection of bus routes and rail lines, how does that network work together? How is it interconnected? And how can that network feed into, for example, local land use and planning efforts? We can begin to focus development around some of those key corridors. Also, not just in the Valley subregion, throughout the county, what can we do to improve transit frequency, connectivity, and the customer experience throughout, especially at emerging transit hubs. Now, we also need to, when we create these strong transit corridors, create first and last mile connections to get people where they need to go. And one of our key priorities here is to define an active transportation priority list and advance project development to position for funding. There's been a lot of active transportation projects identified, not necessarily as much prioritization and dedicated funding. All right, so also on the multimodal connectivity side, on the next slide, improving the quality and efficiency of county roadways. State of good repair is something we've heard again and again is a huge issue in the county. So prioritizing those kinds of improvements on the local roadways is a top priority. In order to have traffic move more smoothly on the arterial network, using technology, interconnected smart corridors that help traffic flow more smoothly, also corresponds with the bus network as well. That's something that can help improve operations and reduce delay. And completing the San Bernardino County portion of the regional multimodal managed lane system there's several more segments identified in the regional plan, so completing those elements. And also continuing to manage network demand, continuing carpool, vanpool, and other travel demand management initiatives and partnerships to manage that demand where we can. All right, so when we move on to overall freight movement, what are our strategic priorities to improve the freight network? The first key recommendation is to designate and improve key freight corridors. So on the highway network, those are some of our strategic freight corridors. However, on the arterial side, how freight and trucks move from, say, the highway network to the distribution centers, identifying key priority freight arterials, freight networks, and upgrading those so they can handle, that kind of travel and, provide strategic locations for parking, things like that, hopefully reducing some of those conflicts between freight and land use. Also investing in high volume freight corridors across the network, including bottleneck relief at key locations. Continuing to work with the private sector, collaborating on transition to zero emission truck technology and providing charging locations for zero emission trucks is a priority, and continuing to work with the rail providers on opportunities to shift freight from truck to rail where feasible. And strategic priorities for our climate change problems. This is definitely a sticky question, but one of the things we know about the county is there's quite a few areas that depend on one or two key arteries. There aren't a lot of alternatives to how to get around, so prioritizing those corridors for resiliency improvements. Brightline West is a new opportunity to create an alternative to I-15 through the Capone Pass. So we want to prioritize connections to Brightline West to create a viable viable alternative, and kind of make that a really crucial link in the system. Continuing to support zero emissions transition is a huge topic area now. Again, facilitating clean truck transitions, working with our transit agency partners, and continuing to collaborate on the transition to zero emissions transit vehicles, and supporting development of hydrogen production in the Inland Empire. Hydrogen is useful technology in areas like this with long travel distances because of its range benefits compared to battery technology. And moving on to equity priorities, some of our focuses here include taking advantage of the funding that's available. Many of the grant funding programs at this point have strong ties to equity focus areas. And so if we can show how we're improving things in these communities, then that's a really good opportunity to position for funding. So taking advantage of those opportunities and expanding programs that help provide affordability benefits and continuing to engage with equity-focused communities. Continuing expanding and advertising fare reduction programs, free transit fare events for students, seniors, low-income riders has been very successful throughout the county. So expanding those programs is a priority, and partnering with community-based organizations to expand engagement with local communities as well. And on the funding side, some of our priorities are expanding sources of funding for transit operations. This is definitely a tricky problem. Funding for capital improvements is a lot easier to come by than ongoing sources of transit operating funding. But there are some opportunities to work with state and regional partners to increase the flexibility of the funding they provide, to perhaps divert more of that to transit operations, and continue to use toll revenue from the managed lane network for transit projects and ongoing operations as well. And just overall increasing the flexibility and effectiveness of funding programs for future local funding measures. For example, the eventual continuation of Measure I, aligning the funding strategies with the priorities in this plan. Could kind of align them with the needs of the region. Developing a VMT mitigation bank. This allows for projects that do increase the amount of miles traveled on the network to pay into a fund, and for those funds to be used elsewhere in the network to be able to fund needed improvements that help to hopefully reduce vehicles miles traveled elsewhere in the network. So that can be very useful, in SBCTA starting something like that in the near future. And continuing to partner with community-based organizations to support grant applications, and showing those partnerships can help a lot in getting those funding opportunities through. All right, well, I think I should stop talking for a moment. So this is where we hopefully we want to connect some more input from you. We want to know how you see those priorities. So if you could help us out and show us what are the most important topics you want to see covered and prioritized in the LRMTP. So you can select up to 3. So please let us know, what are your top priorities? I'm going to give it a little longer. Everybody has a chance to weigh in here. All right, I think that's pretty, oh, we got one more, great. All right. Okay, let's go ahead and close that one. So I see a lot of support for active transportation improvements, closely followed by transit, climate change, and some of the other categories, less support for freight impacts. So thank you. We really appreciate that. That helps us understand, where some of the interest is. So let's move on to our next poll. So what should be SBCTA's most important priorities to fund over the next 20 years? So a lot of this has to do with how SBCTA allocates funding, what should be prioritized. So in terms of what gets funded, what are your top 3 priorities? All right. Okay. I think got the same number of answers as we did for the previous question, so it looks like we're all in on that one. Kind of an even split between active transportation and transit improvements, and some support as well for zero emissions transition as well. So appreciate your input on these. All right, well, I will go talk briefly about some next steps, and then we'll get to the questions. So a little plug for our current survey. So we have a survey available now at the link on your screen. This survey has some more specific questions about projects that may be coming up in your area of residence. So we have these survey kind of grouped by subregion, and we're inviting folks to weigh in on some of the improvements in those subregions. So we really recommend you take this survey, tell your friends about it. We do have a $100 Amazon gift card drawing at the end of it. So this will help us understand some of your opinions on these projects that are planned. All right. Overall, we're going to be continuing to collect community input over the next couple of months as we flesh out the plan recommendations. Once we have, we want to make sure we have the right strategic priorities. We're going to be developing an action plan and then kind of applying some of those recommendations at the sub area level. So that's all going to come together in the draft LRMTP that we're going to be distributing in the next couple months. So we really appreciate your continued engagement and look forward to discussing your questions. All right, so I will pull up, if I think it's correctly, let's see, if I'm the Q&A. If you want to, if folks have questions, feel free to type them in the Q&A, or you're welcome to raise your hand, and we will take questions that way as well. So I'm reading one question right now. Did you take into account the current over-normalization of the car-based layout in San Bernardino in constructing the models? That is, would the results have been different if respondents were used to an active or train-based transportation network? Yeah, I mean, the model that we used to analyze the system takes into account kind of, a mixture of the current network, travel behavior that we see, across the network, and it's calibrated to give a reasonable expectation of the outcomes that we see on the network today, and so we have some confidence that we're predicting the future accurately. So sure, if there was a different travel behavior, then we might see different outcomes. However, it's kind of, the model is calibrated to how San Bernardino County residents currently use their system. But yes, as different things come online, if there's more provision of, say, active transportation improvements, if transit is more convenient, we would expect to see some differences in how people use the system. I hope that's a helpful answer in some ways. All right, looks like we've got a couple more questions. Are there any plans for extending the arrow line throughout the rest of the region? That's a good question. And is there, Josh, is there anything you'd like to say on that one?
I can go ahead and take that.
Yeah,
Oh, hi,
I just saw
Nancy.
Nancy pop up.
Hey, Nancy, how are you?
Guys, out of the darkness. Hi, I'm Nancy Strickard. I'm the transit manager here at San Bernardino County Transportation Authority. And there are long-range plans, but nothing definitive yet. I know the city of Highland has had interest in that, but as of now, due to funding, we only have a limited amount of Measure I currently. That is really on the back burner based on future. I know we're going to a Measure I renewal, and that will probably be predicate on whether or not we extend the arrow line, but we would like to do, SBCTA would like to move forward with that.
Thanks. All right, next question. When are the potholes going to be fixed in Big Bear? Not slurry coated, actually repaired to accommodate the millions of annual visitors who support our economy. Yeah, I understand the frustration on that one. We've heard a lot about state of good repair throughout the network. I don't know if I have an answer on specific parts of the network and when they would be repaired. I think, you know, I can say is that this plan includes, you know, prioritization of those local improvements in terms of how those things get funded. All right. Next question is, how is SBCTA engaging with local government to incentivize walkable, greener communities? Good question. One of the things that we have done throughout this process is to have an ongoing stakeholder working group where we have representatives from many of the local communities and other agencies, the transit agencies, Caltrans, you know, different stakeholders. And we talk about a lot of these issues and how we incentivize walkable, greener communities is certainly a topic that has come up repeatedly. And some of the issues that we've, you know, or discussions we've had is, of course, sort of the transportation network decisions are not always tied to the local land use planning. You know, that goes on at a more local level, whereas sometimes transportation planning is at a more regional level. So we've had some really good discussions about how to pair those together. And that's kind of where some of our discussions come together in terms of, you know, identifying what SBCTA can do at a regional level is to help identify, for example, what are some of those key corridors where we can really invest in upgraded, for example, transit service, active transportation connections, and then those networks can get incorporated into local land use planning efforts. So hopefully it's not, you know, too distributed where everybody's doing something different. If we have kind of this cohesive network that we can build on and start to incorporate into those plans, and hopefully, you know, start to build some of those more walkable communities around transit and active transportation. So,
Marie, can I add one more comment?
please.
Maybe Josh was probably going to say a thing. We also have, on a smaller scale, planning department as well as transit department has an actual Article 3, which is bike and ped pathway grant, as well as transit bus stop improvements. And both of those are small grants that each of the cities can apply for. So we actively do have money available to the cities so that they can do pathways. And bus stop improvements is not just for the bus stops or shelters. It also can be the pathway to the stop. So we are investing in money into the cities, but it's just at a smaller scale. Josh, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, so in terms of kind of coordinating on the land use side, of course, our jurisdictions have the full authority to kind of implement the land use plans that they have through their general plans and zoning ordinances, of course. However, there are growing trend where transportation authorities like us, as well as the state, could incentivize the local jurisdictions to build more denser areas in their cities, and kind of provide that incentive to build those housing projects as well. So there's certainly a trend to increase integration between transportation and land use for sure. So we're working closely in some of our jurisdictions. Again, it's more of the local jurisdictions willing to kind of invest in those higher density projects. So in those instances, we're certainly working closely with those jurisdictions to make sure that the transportation improvements also occur with those denser projects.
Thanks, Josh and Nancy. All right, our next question is, what is Measure I costing individual taxpayers? That's a good question. I know it's a 1/2 cent sales tax, but what that actually equals out to in terms of sort of funding, or how much that costs at the end of the day, I don't think I have that answer handy. But is there anything else that anyone would like to share on that one?
Not sure how the math kind of works out.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Yeah, I think we can, if there's anything more specific in that answer or in that question that you'd like to add to it that we can, get back to you on, then please do. But it is a 1/2 cent sales tax. All right. What about electrification of Metrolink? Brightline is coming, and San Bernardino Metrolink needs to be double tracked and electrified. Yeah, well, Metrolink certainly, has been a stakeholder in this plan, has helped us weigh in on the different transit improvements in the region, as well as some of the zero emissions improvements. So actually, Joel, if you're willing to come online, you have been working with Metrolink on some of their zero emissions efforts. Is there anything you'd like to add to this question?
So Metrolink has been looking at options for transitioning to a zero emission fleet, but so far the analysis has been looking at multiple options, and there's no commitment to a particular technology. So electrification is with overhead wires one option, but there's also battery multiple unit options and the hydrogen multiple unit that SBCTA is introducing soon on the airline. And it's sort of in general for rail planning in California. It looks like it's going to end up being a combination of those three across the state in different places. But at this time, there's not a commitment to a single technology.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer. So yeah, of course, from SBCTA's perspective, we're investing in hydrogen technology. So we're a little bit more biased, but when we say ZEV technology, we're talking about both hydrogen and battery technology.
Right. Great. Thank you. Next question is kind of on a similar topic. I would like to push back on the development of hydrogen hubs in our region and would prefer we take a look at the Bay Area's electrification of Caltrain as a model to replicate. Yeah, I think the kind of current state is that, a lot of those different technologies are being evaluated in terms of their costs, in terms of their impacts, in terms of their timelines, and what kind of vehicles they can accommodate. So, but that there's multiple options on the table right now. In terms of hydrogen, in the bus network, one of the reasons that a lot of the agencies are looking at hydrogen is that the hydrogen bus vehicles have longer range capabilities compared with today's battery electric buses. That may change in future if battery electric buses become more efficient and can travel longer distances. But transit agencies, bus agencies are finding that they need to operate more vehicles compared with their current diesel fleet if they switch to battery electric. That adds cost and all down the operating chain. So hydrogen is a more effective option in a region where there's a lot of long bus routes. So anything else on that one to add?
No, I mean, I just want to say, the option, we're looking at all options, just like Metrolink, of course.
Right.
Yeah, and so, you know, it all depends on how kind of the technology trend happens. So
Yeah.
it is really hard to predict which one wins, and it's hard for us to pick that winner right at this point.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. All right. San Bernardino County has been built primarily for cars for at least 50 years. Measure I continues that approach for another 20 years or so. Is SBCTA considering approaches that might dedicate more resources to other transportation methods? Well, I would say the short answer is yes. You know, in terms of particularly, for example, you know, eventual continuation of the funding measure, you know, I believe SBCTA is looking at greater flexibility in how it allocates its funds. And an acknowledgement that, you know, in order to meet some of these goals that are set out, you know, at the state level, there's a need to invest more in other modes, or at least, you know, be able to move that funding around a little bit and have it not so tightly tied to one category versus another. So anything
But
else on that point?
what I can say on that topic is that we're compared to the past, we will definitely be providing and prioritizing more multimodal options for our county. How much more? That's for our board to kind of decide, right? And which mode to prioritize. But certainly, in comparison to the past, we are going to, with the new measures that are kind of that we're contemplating, it will be much more multimodal than the past.
And if I can add just one more comment, just some general education for everyone. Measure I only funds a small part of any bus transit operation in San Bernardino County. So for the valley, it's only 8%. And I forgot what it's in the rest of the other regions. But we have other local transit dollars that are actually from the state, which is a 1/4 cent sales tax, and that is given when you buy something at the store, you give that to us. So we only have a small amount of that. So, but one of the big issues just that we're working on is that the cost of running operation has substantially increased over time. And with being mandated to have zero emission vehicles by 2040 has changed our approach on how we're spending money. We have to make the conversion as well as able to maintain it when some of the technology has not even reached some of our agencies. For example, Mountain Transit, they obviously have to be electric, but there's not a vehicle yet that can go up the hill to that steep incline that is a zero emission as of now. But I just wanted to make sure that everyone knew that there's other funding that transit also takes in. Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate that, Nancy. All right. Why are future West Valley Connector and past SBX BRT projects not fully separated throughout the routes? I assume by separated, you mean why are they not fully separated right of way? Yeah, good question. Multiple reasons. One is just, you know, certain areas, you know, when we talk about BRT routes, some areas have more or less affinity toward fully separated lanes. Different jurisdictions, you know, some of them are very supportive, some of them are less supportive. But also the cost sometimes of building fully separated lanes, when we add that infrastructure, it becomes much more costly. So, you know, when we talk about certain future things like, you know, future networks where we want to, for example, invest in more bus corridors and improve those corridors, sometimes it's a trade-off between, for example, investing a lot of money in one corridor and perhaps doing it to a really high level, fully separated right-of-way, things like that, versus being able to provide improvements to more routes, but perhaps not at that higher level. There's in terms of, you know, how you build it, whether you can get the right of way, you know, to run that without, you know, needing to take right of way. There's a lot of different reasons why things might not be, you know, completely separated along the alignment, but it's always kind of trade-offs in terms of how can we make the most improvement we can with the resources and the constraints that we have. So, Nancy, is there anything you want to add? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Are there any talks, even if not definite, to explore overhead catenary methods of propulsion for buses or rail? Yeah, I think that's one kind of method. We talked about, you know, different ways of electrifying buses. We haven't, as part of this project, specifically talked about overhead catenary. I don't know if anybody has talked about that specifically, Nancy, in your discussions, but not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, same here. Agreed.
Okay. Yeah, when we talk about zero emissions transition, it's usually battery electric buses or hydrogen powered buses. All right, can we expand free fare transit to students who are attending our adult schools, not just K-12 and higher ed institutions? All right, that's a good question.
We agree, James.
Yes, absolutely. K through 12 was our baby step to get it countywide, and we would like to do. I know Metrolink has it for college, and some of the agencies have it for their college students are part of their program. But we would like to see, we would like to also see in higher education, and we're working on that. It doesn't look like we're working on it, but we're trying to find, really what it comes down to is we're trying to find the money that we can pay, SBCTA can pay for it. That's what's happening with the K through 12 is we're finding resources to pay for that for the county. So we definitely support that idea.
Mhm. Great. Okay. Yeah, I know we're running a little short on time. We're going to try to get through the answers to the questions we have now. I would just ask that if you have additional questions beyond what you've already submitted, feel free to email those to us. So let's try to see if we can get through these. What about transit span of service? San Bernardino is the 12th largest region and needs transit services every day, including holidays, and service needs to run to midnight for job shifts. Yes, transit span of service is a big challenge and kind of comes back to those trade-offs with operating funds. Nancy?
Agreed. And the other issue that's happening in the valley is that we don't have, Omnitrans doesn't have enough coach operators to serve it. So they're really only at 82% right now because during COVID, people left the jobs or they found other opportunities somewhere else. So they're trying to get back to 100%. But yes, absolutely, we agree with you on that. And we are working with Omnitrans to help, as well as the other operators, to get them to expand service.
Right. Great, thank you. Okay, it would be beneficial for Mountain Transit Authority to restart the transportation to and from Lucerne Valley, as many people from the valley come up to work and vice versa. This route stopped during COVID. Yes, that's something that, we definitely have had discussions about some of those services, and that's something we can certainly pass on as Mountain Transit Authority as part of our stakeholder working team.
Correct. We'll pass it on to Mountain Transit.
What is the progress of past projects like Ontario People Mover and the Rialto Metrolink station? Why are they taking so long? That's a good question.
Ontario project, I'm assuming you're referring to kind of that tunnel project. it is moving forward. I think Nancy, I don't know where we are with environmental, but we've actually put money towards doing the environmental first, and we're actively seeking funds for the actual capital project.
Correct. You're correct.
Rialto, I think they've gotten grant funds lately, so you'll see some work being done soon. Nancy, anything to add?
Correct.
Yeah.
We put money on double track.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, I thought my mouth opened and said yes. I'm sorry.
Okay. All right. How does van pooling work?
Ooh,
Good
Nancy,
question.
that's all you.
Since we are short on time, you can actually go to sbcta.com. At the top right, it says commuter service. Drop down, there's a van pool, and it'll send you to the link. There is a wonderful explanation on that. Otherwise, you can call our office and speak to myself or Nicole Soto or Myrani, and we can. Well, Myrani's new, so I won't put her on the spot. Nicole or myself, and we can get you to the van polling location. And actually we'll drop it into the, thank you for putting it in there. But we can walk you through the steps as well.
Great. And what's the plan to expand awareness and encourage commuters to ride share, van pool, and take advantage of free access to the toll lanes on the 10 freeway?
We're planning to work on a marketing campaign, that the multimodal umbrella that we take care of in our department, which will encourage rideshare and van pooling as well. And just so you know, we've also connected with Omnitrans, so their buses will be able to ride free on the those express lanes as well too. And we're working with our with our highway side, the express lanes group, and we're trying to come up with a project that if you ride transit, then you can get credits towards the express lanes. It's something similar, I guess LA Metro has it, so we're trying to get that in place. But yes, you will see a marketing campaign to encourage people. And I barely just bought myself because we ride transit. So I finally got my fast track myself.
All right. San Bernardino connects with LA Metro bus service. San Bernardino should make TAP interchangeable with LA County. Yeah, overall sort of fair integration is definitely a priority for the study. So that's something we'll certainly take into consideration in terms of the specific technologies. Next question, how can Metrolink provide more frequency while sharing track with freight? As a rider, it seems delays are more the rule than the exception. How can Metrolink grow with such congestion on the existing tracks? Good question.
This is an ongoing issue and concerns, and there've been several Metrolink agenda items on there. There's no definitive answer here because, as you know, some of the track is owned by the freight as well. So this to be continued. I am sorry, that's not a really good solid answer, but that's unfortunately where we're at.
Yeah, and Metrolink has a extensive program of improvements plan called the SCORE program that will help them provide the frequency increases that they're planning to deliver in the coming years. Aerial tram from San Bernardino to Lake Arrowhead and Big Bear. They've been successful in other places. Yes, absolutely. We know that this has been studied and been considered for quite a while. As of now, there are no current plans for an aerial tram. Finally, what's going on with the expansion of the Once Upon a Time Gold Line from Azusa Pacific into Pomona and eventually into our county?
I think it's finally coming, or they're working on it. I do know that SBCTA has put funding towards the project, and you'll see more information come out as we get further along. But it's finally made it to us, and so we're starting to see work on it.
Well, I need to clarify. I think
Yes, thank you.
they have funding to come all the way to our county line. I'm not sure when they'll be able to actually construct and come all the way to our county line.
All right, well, I think we covered the questions. Thank you, everybody, so much for your participation and your input. and you know, your responses to the poll questions. So we really appreciate your time tonight. Again, if you have further questions, you know, things we didn't answer enough or other thoughts on the plan itself, please don't hesitate to contact us. We have our website, and feel free to email lrmtp@gosbcta.com. That's the best way to reach us with further comment. Without further ado, wish you all a good evening, and thank you again so much for your time.